Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third episode of Educational Lounge. I'm Heartless. With me is this wise and handsome man, CavalierGuest. And today, we're going to be talking about drafts. But before we talk about drafts, I have a few announcements to make. Let's start with the small one. For the WoW nerds out there, Battle for Azeroth is launching tonight. I'm personally very excited about that. Cav, I have a feeling you're not really playing World of Warcraft. Kind of makes me sad.
I was actually, during Wrath, the guild leader of a top 400 worldwide rating guild. And it was basically all I did. And then I quit and never looked back. I can't. WoW's not a game I can play halfway. I'm either like 16 hours a day or not at all. So had to cut back a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'm actually kind of back to the game with my significant other. It's kind of a thing we do, so I'm quite excited about that. But after all, this show is not about World of Warcraft. It is about Heroes of the Storm, and while I'm excited about that, and I'll be playing it lunch, it's not the main course. The second announcement I have to make, guys, is this educational show is going to be moving. So instead of happening on Mondays 9 p.m., it's going to move to Thursdays 7 p.m. The reason is very simple. Open division, we do not want to collide with that. It will help get us more viewers and of course make sure that more people are watching the show and getting the educational content out there. Also, considering Cav is actually a coach for Open Division team, I think it kind of makes sense if he gets to watch as much Open Division as possible. So that's always a good thing.
I also do occasionally get to cast Open Division when Heroes Hype lets me, so.
That too. And the next announcement is actually the big kahuna here. Next week, on Thursday, the 23rd, we're going to have the mock draft tournament happening. And I'm really excited about that. This show is about draft, and the next show is actually going to be putting all you viewers out there on the pedal. We're going to be testing and see if you actually listen to anything we had to say. So next week, going to have the mock draft tournament. We actually even going to have some small rewards out there for you. So a few skin codes here and there given away for the winners. So hopefully we're going to have a lot of participants. Not too many. We do want to keep the show within a few hours time frame. But anyone who enters is eligible to participate. So hopefully we're going to have enough people to make it an interesting show. With that being said, I think we can start with the draft show, Cav. Also, kind of a small thing. We had a lot of questions on our Discord channel. Those will be answered at the end of the show, so don't worry about that. I will take care of all the people who asked questions. So, okay. Cav, let's talk about drafting. This is what we're here for. People been saying that drafting is both simple and complicated at the same time, and while it sounds a bit weird, how can one thing can be complicated and simple? I hope that by the end of the show you'll understand better what that means. So the floor is yours, Cav.
Oh God, we need to address this historically, because drafting for a long time has been considered one of the hardest thing in Heroes of the Storm. For those of you who remember, there was a famous rant last year by Splendor, who was a top support player in EU at the time, and he's like he was the drafter for his team, and drafting is too hard, is what he said. You can win or lose games in the draft too easily, and Blizzard at that point in the game was trying to make draft really, really impactful. They changed support, so it was like this is a sustained support and this is a burst support. That's actually how we got the double support meta. Is since supports couldn't deal with both, you would just draft two of them. And it became a game where you could limit those enough. That's not as true now. Blizzard has intentionally stepped away from that philosophy. But drafting is basically really complicated because you're constantly thinking about the map. We went over last week. We did like a brief overview of maps and like at the very, very basic level of what you want to think about. And that was still just a ton of information. It was an hour and a half show going over 10 maps. And we could have gone for an hour on each map. And I want to put this in perspective. Wubby, who is the drafter for Dignitas, has done interviews where he says he spends about an average of 8 to 9 hours prepping drafts throughout the week, every week that they're doing scrims for Mexican HG. It's like, I want to practice this, I want to plan this. That's about an hour per map per week for professional play. That is from my experience talking to pro teams, fairly standard. So drafting is a huge time investment if you're doing it at a really high level. But I think that's the thing that people get worried about is they don't know every hero, and they don't know what this hero does or what that hero can do. They don't necessarily play every hero, and that's the thing that scares them is like I don't know what these heroes do, so I'm really scared. And we're gonna go over later how to draft for your team. If you're an amateur team, if you're on a Heroes Lounge team, Nexus Gaming Series, whatever. If you're on an amateur league or even Open Division, I'll explain some of what pros actually do and what everyone should do when it comes to figuring out how you're going to draft. But conceptually, I think a lot of people just need to know what a standard draft kind of is and how we got there. Mm-hmm. And currently, standard draft is you have an offlaner who's basically their job is macro. Minions are really scary. Buildings are worth, well, front towers at least are worth less XP than they used to be. So your offlaner, it's sometimes referred to the solo lane, but basically it's the hero that manages the part of the map where the rest of the team is not. It can be a fixed lane on Dragonshire, generally it's top. But if, for instance, on Sky Temple, a lot of the times your offlaner will start out top while your foreman gets siege and tries to push with the siege while also getting mid soak. And then during the temple phase, your offlaner will actually go bottom because your rest of your team is at the temples. It's literally just wherever the team is not, that's where your offlaner is. It's pretty simple. They need escape, vision tools, self-sustain. They need something that can prevent them from getting ganked, and losing sort of 1v1s. The more wave clear you have, the less time you have to spend in vision. So that's a big consideration. If you clear a wave really quickly, you step up, clear the wave instantly, you're out. The enemy team can't necessarily punish that. That's an offlaner. Tanks in Heroes of the Storm are a really specific thing. They basically initiate team fights and help ward or control vision for the foreman. And I wanna just highlight some fun things that have happened. Octalysis ran solo tank Uther in HGC in the first split. We have seen in competitive play early on in 2016, we saw a solo tank Thrall played by King Caffeine on Battlefield of Eternity. It was a Gazlo Zeratul Thrall comp. They wanted those 3 heroics, and they didn't want to mess around with having a tank in addition to those 3 heroes. They were just like, let's put Caff on Thrall and have him tank. So tanking is not necessarily about whether the hero is a warrior. It's about whether or not a hero has tools to initiate fights. That's the big thing. They had an Earthquake VP Gravo combo that they really wanted, and tanks need to be able to step up for vision, which means they usually get poked. So having a self-sustain mechanic is really good. Thrall sort of fulfilled that requirement at the time. So that's how you want to think about these things. You want to think about tools, and and then you have 2 flex heroes that can be literally anything. Generally, the bog standard, most standard thing in the world is you have 1 roaming hero, a Genji, a Maiev, a Zeratul, a Tracer, a Nova. It doesn't matter. 1 hero whose job is just to roam around the map and try to kill people at opportune moments. And then you have 1 macro hero whose job is to clear waves for the foreman. So you could have like Jaina Maiev. You could have Kael'thas Phoenix. You could have, that's a bad synergy. Don't do that. You could have Jaina Phoenix. That's a good one. But it's just like, and then you can move these roles around. Johanna has wave clear. So if you have a tank that's Johanna, she has poor warding. So maybe you go Johanna Genji, and then you don't necessarily need another wave clear hero because you already have Johanna. So you could go Johanna, Genji, and Tracer, something insane like that. But the standard draft has specific tools. It has enough wave clear. It has enough vision mechanics. It has enough damage. It has enough. Generally, you want some sort of PvE for murking for bosses, and those priorities can go up or down based on.
So, kind of to ask you a question about that. So, what you're saying is a draft should have those specific roles as opposed to those specific heroes. So, for example, like you said, Johanna, while she is a tank, she's not a good warder, so you would need to draft a warder with Johanna. Therefore, you would need to put priority, perhaps, on having the warder in your draft. So what you're looking for essentially is those roles, not those heroes, if that makes sense. Okay.
Correct. And one of the things one of the things you can do, one of the things that I have done a lot of, is just make a spreadsheet with every role you can think of, like warding hero, sustain, CC, hard CC, roots, stuns, silences, and just like list heroes that do those things, and then try to
tick box.
and then yeah, and just like try to find categories, meaningful categories of heroes, and be like, these are tools. And sometimes there's exceptions to those rules. One of the reasons that you see a lot of melee heroes in the offlane isn't just that melee heroes are good in the offlane. Phoenix for a brief period was one of the top offlaners in the game before he got nerfed in his sustain mechanics and sort of a little bit buffed in his damage, which made him better in the format. It's in order to correctly zone fights, you generally need 2 melee. You can think of that as Sonya's like a flanking hero. Zul deals really well with anti-flanking. They're both kind of bruisers. But basically, there's usually multiple paths of approach to a given fight, and that's why you have 2 melee. Triple ranged is considered a really bad comp. And I want to emphasize this, especially because triple ranged used to be very, very meta in 2015 and 2016. Used to be the comp. Everyone went triple ranged. And then as people got better at controlling vision, as people got better at finding these flanks, as mobility even went up, it became very difficult for tanks to be in sort of 2 places at the same time, to do peeling, to do stuff like that. So now it's not just that melee heroes are good in the offlane, although a lot of them are. It's that you kind of need 2 frontline heroes to correctly zone and space fights to prevent your backline from getting destroyed by flanks, or even just hard engages straight past your tank for certain kinds of heroes. And there's some meaningful exceptions to that. For instance, Mathael, at his height, when Tormented Souls was broken, having multiple melee heroes was a huge detriment. And this is something Tempo Storm did first, and a couple of other people copied it afterwards. They went triple ranged, and they would sometimes go triple ranged with like a Tassadar or a double support. When Kael'thas was meta at various times, sometimes you would see triple range comps because it's easier to spread when you're not all melee. And so sometimes there's exceptions, but you have to understand the base roles and why they exist in terms of the way they zone fights, the way they synergize with the map, the way they synergize with each other, the way they make sure that every single lane is soaked. Again, something we talked about last week is XP economy on every map and how important soak is. You can see where there's kind of a trend here where we're building up these tools as we go through the episodes. Mm-hmm. So you really need to know those things. And that's what you should think about drafting. You should think about drafting questions and to the enemy team. Like, can you deal with this? Can you deal with Lightning Breath Phoenix Salvo? Can you deal with Morden's Cage? Can you deal with a de-shielded Illidan just diving at you with an Abathur? Can you deal with that? You want to have drafts that ask questions, and then you want to ban answers, and then you want to think about having not heroes, but tools. Can we control vision? Can we clear waves? Can we do camps? And that's how you want to think about heroes. You don't want to think about specific heroes. You want to think about roles and tools. That's sort of the general way you should be thinking conceptually about drafting to help you understand it a little bit better. And hopefully that helps people understand even some pro drafts that happened this last weekend at Western Clash, because I know there's a lot of confusion about some of those drafts.
Yeah, you kind of touched it, and I think we're going to be talking about this more later, is the dynamic between drafting your own draft versus drafting the answers to the enemy's draft. Maybe we can even touch it right now and answer it and talk about that. When do you actually want to draft your own draft versus when do you want to answer your opponent? Or maybe you need to balance it somewhere in between.
I think it's a really interesting question, because in an ideal world, you would, like, if you planned hard enough, you would get the exact comp you wanted every single time, and the enemy team would pick the heroes that you expected them to pick based on what you know about them or based on the meta. But different people have different conceptions of what meta is. And there's a fun exercise we're going to do later that Heartless doesn't know about, where we're going to actually go over that. But and it even comes down to first or second pick. It's far easier to be reactive in draft and think about answering questions from second pick, because you have more information, and even up to your last pick, you have complete information when you pick your last hero of what's banned, what the enemy team has, what you have. And from first pick, it's far easier to get exactly what you want, but you have to reveal a lot more in advance. So if you pick heroes in your 1, 2, 3 from first pick that are very one-dimensional and it makes your strategy obvious, it should get countered. Against a competent team, it will get countered from second pick. But maybe that doesn't matter. Maybe the strategy is so strong, maybe those heroes are so powerful when executed well that it doesn't matter. Like Hanzo on BOE, for instance, he wins the race. There's no heroes or set of heroes you can draft if you let an enemy team have Hanzo where you win the race. Hanzo's teams are just gonna win the race from 7 onwards. We actually had a great game this weekend where leftovers raced pre-7 because they knew they won the race pre-7. They didn't win post-7. That's not something we see enough to punish that specific power spike of playing around that. But at that point, because you revealed that you have a Hanzo, the enemy team is like, oh, well, we're going to be a side soak defend comp. Like, that's what we're going to do. We know we're going to need to do that, and so they can draft accordingly. As soon as you see that, so. You do want to draft the exact comp that you planned because, and we're gonna jump ahead here, and we're gonna go over how to draft for your team, right? Hero pools and roles matter a lot when it comes to drafting for an actual specific team, not in the abstract of, oh, this hero can do this and here this. If you're starting an amateur team, literally the first thing you should do is sit down and be like, who's going to play what role? You have 2 flexes. Generally, one of them is a little bit more oriented towards mages, and one of them is a little bit more oriented towards auto attackers. And if you want some sort of breadth to your drafts, you could have, or you could categorize them as this is the roaming flex, and this is the wave clear flex, or this is the melee flex. This is the guy who's going to play the melee assassins in the 4-man, and he's going to play the triple tanks. If we go like triple warrior for some reason, that's the guy who's going to play that. And then this is the guy who's going to play the hyper carries, or maybe this is the guy that plays the hyper carries. And this is the guy that might play the double support if we go double support on some maps, like whatever it is. Tassadar, Medivh, Abathur, those are like the weird secondary support heroes. They should all be played by the same guy because they all synergize with a lot of the same heroes in the other slot, right? So you need to figure that out. And then you have a tank player, you have an offlane player, and you have a support player. And I don't want you guys to be like, we have to play the certain heroes. If your support player plays a lot of Lily and like Brightwing and Morales, those picks can win. Like, not maybe in, I don't know what Division 1 Heroes Lounge is. Is that what it's called, Division 1?
Yep.
Maybe not in Division 1 Heroes Lounge. But one of the things that's really been demonstrated over and over and over again by like bronze to GM climbs or by one-trick streams is that, or even by pro teams, like playing a hero a lot. Like you see, it's a good example. Like you see Poik on Li Ming. Like Poik on Li Ming is terrifying. Rich on Hanzo is terrifying. And like those are professional players. They put thousands of games in those heroes. One of my favorite examples is actually Thrall and Alarak on Rich, despite the fact that... Actually, that's not a good example. But the point is, even pro players have variance in how good they are at a hero. So having small hero pools, it's a little bit harder now with the triple ban, but having small hero pools of heroes you're really good at is the first thing you want to focus on when you're playing a team. And then once you, like, sit down and look at a spreadsheet of the heroes you guys play. Maybe it's like 4 or 5 heroes each. You're like, oh, well, drafting's pretty easy. We're always going to be picking from these 4 or 5 heroes. We can then like make a map spreadsheet and be like, okay, these are 3 comps potentially that we want to run on these maps. And then it's like, well, we know what the comp does. We know what the questions they're answering. We know what tools they have. And if you don't know, if someone on your team is playing that hero, you can ask them because they play that hero. Presumably, they should be able to articulate what's good about that hero because they play it. Otherwise, they wouldn't be on the spreadsheet to begin with. And it's really important to think of this in terms of the roles, too, because comms make a big difference. The way offlane have comms, the way your tank has comms, the way your support have comms, are all actually very different from each other. So if you do things like, oh, I'm a Brightwing player, but I also play ETC. So if we're not playing Brightwing, but we're playing ETC, I'm going to play ETC, and someone else is going to play the Malfurion or something. You can do that. You can play heroes instead of roles. And in very rare instances, even in pro play, that does sometimes work. When Kyocha was playing support for Genji, but he was still the best Abathur player in the world. He would sometimes play Abathur, and Saki would play support instead. Or if they were playing Tracer, he would play Tracer instead, and Saki would play support just because he's really good at Tracer. But it is better in general to have a role on a team because it affects everything about how you communicate with your team when you swap up roles, and it essentially wastes hours upon hours of practice time if you ever do like role swaps just for particular heroes. It's not the worst thing in the world.
That's quite interesting. I never thought about the role swap and all of that in the context of communication, but that makes a lot of sense actually.
Yeah, and it can screw your drafts. Like you can actually just, and it's so easy to have a short list of heroes that you know everyone plays and draft from that pool, as opposed to trying to think of literally all 81 heroes now that could potentially be good on some maps at some times in some combination. And it makes a really big difference to draft. It's one of the first things I talk to whenever I talk to any team I'm coaching. And literally one of the first things I did with GFE. GFE, by the way, told me that they could play anything. Like some of the people on that team were like, I can just play anything, just whatever. And so like when we first started the first week of scrims, I believed them, and I was like, okay, let's see if you can play this. They couldn't play it. I won't say what it was, but they couldn't play it. They couldn't play it at a professional level. Hosty, during his interview when he played the week he played ETC, was like, I thought I could play ETC. Turns out he made a game-losing mistake on ETC. Couldn't play ETC to professional level. You need to be able to evaluate if you can actually play a hero well, and be honest with your team about where you're at with a hero. If you're bad at a hero, but you're like medium bad at a hero, and it's good enough to see play at your level, then you tell your team, I can work on that, and then you can identify holes. Once you have that heroes pool spreadsheet, oh man, you can identify holes so easy. Like, oh man, we don't have any roaming heroes. I once played Zeratul. Maybe I can start playing Zeratul again, and that'll be a roaming hero. There's all these things you can start doing once you start thinking of this in terms of tools, and you can notice these obvious holes. It's a lot of spreadsheets. It's a lot of like sitting down, writing things, and thinking. Drafting, prep for drafting. Again, it's an average for a pro team 8 hours a week for one guy or sometimes the whole team, depending on how teams like to prepare their drafts. So if you're an amateur team, it's gonna take some time to set up. You're looking at a good amount of time spread out over, usually a couple of weeks, especially if you're a new team and you start scrimming and you're like, oh, this is working for us and this isn't.
Yeah, it kind of bring us back to the beginning though. If you had to describe or give a number to the importance of a draft, how important would you say is winning the draft? Some people would say, again, you mentioned Splendor at the beginning. Some people would say it's even as big as 50%. 50% of your chance of winning the whole game is within the draft. Would you give it that much value? Would it weigh that much?
I think there's quite a lot of variance in how big outdrafts can be in Heroes of the Storm, because let's assume perfect execution. Let's assume both teams have absolutely perfect execution. I would say probably you could win purely via the draft 10% of the time. I would say that goes up on some maps. Like on Braxis, I would say you could win via draft like 30 to 40% of the time. On Cursed, maybe 20% of the time. On like Volskaya, it's going to be like 5-6%, with some exceptions. So it's highly map dependent, and you'll notice that like the popular maps in professional play are the maps where that number is lower. the maps where you can win in draft are not the maps that are most played in professional play. There's a reason for that. But when it comes to execution, I would say that you can outdraft people very frequently because there's people that are drafting meta. And in fact, Arkaner tweeted today that he's going to be drafting for Team Liquid going forward for the next split.
Okay.
And his explanation in his tweet was, we were trying to copy other teams' drafts without understanding them, and that's why we were inconsistent, instead of finding our own meta. So he was like, no, we're not going to do this anymore. I'm going to draft for the team. We're going to do things that we understand for reasons that we understand.
Huh.
And that's what we're going to play. So if you draft a comp you can execute that is bad versus a god comp that the enemy team cannot execute, you won the draft. And there's that other dimension. It's not just an objective, do we have tools? It's, can we actually play these heroes at a level that's appropriate to what we're doing. Whether that's your gold tier league, whether that's your Division 4 lounge team, it doesn't matter. You have to be able to execute the comps you draft for them to actually be good. And in that sense, I see outdrafts all the time in amateur play from teams that take drafting seriously and only draft things they can execute versus teams that like, pros are drafting this, it's probably good. And that literally happens at the pro level. Snitch did an interview not too long ago where he was like, metas are usually top down because people see what the top teams are doing and just copy it without understanding why. We've seen even down to talents where like Wubby was taking Aldor Peacekeeper specifically versus Diablo Phoenix, and then everyone just took Aldor Peacekeeper all the time because Wubby was taking it. Don't do that. Understand why you're picking the things you're picking. It will make you a better player.
It's quite interesting that you're saying that even at the pro level where you'd expect people to actually know what they're drafting, it's not always the case. That's actually quite interesting.
And like for people who are wondering about Temple Storm's execution of Western Clash, Swoy is drafting for Temple Storm now, and Swoy is bringing in a Korean style draft. And Fan did an interview about this, about how bumpy the road has been executing the drafts that Swoy is giving them. And there's this question of, is Swoy bad at drafting or is Tempo bad at executing the drafts that Swoy is picking? Because those are Korean drafts. If you go like look at Genji or Tempest, you will see those exact styles of drafts in Korea. But they're winning with them, and Tempest Storm is not. What's the difference? The difference isn't the draft. The difference is the execution.
Interesting. A good point.
So if it applies to pros, it applies to you.
Yeah, it's kind of remind me of the Hammer uprising we've seen right after the who was it? Rich, I believe. He kind of brought Hammer back into the meta, and then we've seen like Hammer popping everywhere, but. Not every draft with Hammer or against her made a lot of sense, and I guess you can attribute it to the fact that most teams didn't actually know exactly how and where to draft Hammer.
Yeah, and Hammer, and it even comes down to laning arrangements. For instance, one of the subtle things that wasn't talked about very much when Hammer got seen at MSB was on Dragonshire, for instance, and Tomb of the Spider Queen. When Bridge played Hammer, he was the offlane until level 10. Because Hammer rotates so slowly, having her rotate between lanes is a huge detriment until the mid game when you can just push a lane instead of having to rotate. And so they just had him offlane. Is that normal? Is it normal to have a ranged hero on the offlane? No.
Yeah.
But it was the best arrangement of lanes. So drafting is not just and we keep saying this. Drafting is not just about winning the things. It's like, how are you going to lane this? Who's going to go where at what time? How do these things work? What advantages can you generate on the map by having these heroes here and here and here? And where you're going to go to lanes in the first 30 seconds is something that you should talk about as the game's loading every single time. Are you going to brawl mid? Are you going to go straight to lanes? Who's going to go where? How long are they going to stay there? Are you going to swap if the enemy team does something in particular? The enemy team has a really good push comp. Let's say they have Vikings. Like the obvious example, 4-man push comp with Vikings. You're not going to have your offlaner oppose the 4-man. That's not going to be a thing. If your offlaner happens to go to the wrong lane, you're going to clear waves and then switch so that your offlaner is opposing a Viking instead of the entire enemy team, right? You'll end up in some sort of 3-1-1. So you have to draft with your laning arrangements in mind. It's not just like you're drafting purely for team fight or something where it's like, okay, this hero beats this hero in a fight. You think about the entire map and the entire course of the game from 1 till core dies.
It's interesting. We have a question in chat. Kind of goes back to the preparations that some of the drafters are putting in. What do those 8 hours of preps consist of? Not sure if you can answer it, but maybe you can.
It's a good question, actually. So generally, a draft prep, you start at the beginning of the week and you're thinking about, okay, what do I think is good in the meta? What do we need to test? What maps do we need to test it on? Okay, these are the drafts that we're going to try going in on each individual map. Generally, you want, like in an ideal world, you want like 5 different draft strategies for each map. Amateur teams, I think you can get away with 3. I think 3 is fine. But you go over them and you review them and you're like, is this one dead? Is this one because of a meta shift or because of a patch? Is this one dead? Do we need, and what do we do to fix it? And then you're like, okay, this is what we're scrimming this week to see if it's still good. This is what we can't execute. This is a problem. This is the comp we're having problems with XYZ hero. Can I change this, or do we just need to practice this hero more? Do I still think this is good on this map? And then at the end of the week, when scrims are over and you're going into the weekend for HUC, you're like, okay, this is this is what we're drafting for this specific match. So you go look at the enemy team's drafts that are public and what they have been playing on each map. What maps have they been picking? What maps have they been banning? What map do you want to ban against them? Best thing for an amateur team, this is a really good tip. Best thing for an amateur team you can ever do for yourself is always have a consistent ban map. Pick a map your team will never play, never practice it, never draft it, never scrim it. If you're scrimming against a team, they ask to scrim it, just be like, we don't play that map. And if they ask, can we play it anyway? Be like, no, your practice will not be good on that map against us because we never play that map. We are bronze 5 on that map. You will just stomp us and it'll be meaningless. Doesn't matter. Never play a map. There's 9 competitive maps. You should only ever play 8 of them. Like just narrow it down, because the more you narrow your practice as a team, and hero pools also like narrow your practice, the better you will be at the things you actually can execute. But that's what prep consists of for pros. It's like constantly reevaluating, thinking of drafts, going over it. You know, you don't get to ADRD levels of like, oh yeah, Zarya is good in this meta, without spending some time sitting down and thinking about, okay, what if they did this? And then, you know, sometimes look at a teammate and you'll like mock draft it. You're like, okay, I want this comp. And you'll mock draft it out and be like, okay, we can never get this comp. They're always going to be banning this piece or this piece or this piece.
I guess it kind of explains why we don't see a lot of Braxis. I would imagine, right?
Yes,
especially when we go back to the last episode when we talked about Braxis and how complicated it can get with the draft and the lane arrangement with the, you know, how did you call it? Rock, paper, scissors, lizard, Spock.
Lizard Spock.
Yeah. So I guess because there's so many ways to draft there, I guess it just makes sense to ban the map and not deal with that.
Yeah, and it's the reason it's banned in Korea. I think there's been like 1 or 2 series in all of Korean HCC this year where Braxis was not banned by one team, and they literally just don't practice it. And since they don't practice it, they always ban it.
Makes sense. Yeah, fantastic. I guess we can kind of go over some of the educational show questions we had on Discord. And actually, before that, there's something came here from Diddley Squad. He asked us kind of to go over comfort pick versus meta pick for amateur teams. And I know that's always been something very interesting for a lot of people to consider, because you want to imitate the pros. I mean, you know, you have Genji, you have Johanna, you have Muradin, Garrosh, you have all those Hanzo, you have all those power picks that look so good when you're watching HGC, but then you pick them and it's like, okay, how do I make Hanzo work? Why everyone's go W build? I can hit my Ws. I'll just go Q build or something a bit, you know, different. But so maybe kind of let's talk about kind of comfort versus meta.
I mean, it goes back to the same thing we were talking about earlier. If you can't execute something, don't pick it. If you can't execute W build Hanzo, don't pick it on BOE. Q build is not actually that bad on other maps where you're just thinking about wave clear. But if you're in like Cursed Hollow or BOE and you're drafting Hanzo, you go W build or you're bad. Like those are the options. And if you were good at a hero, you wouldn't pick it in situations where you couldn't play it, like you couldn't execute it. And the same thing should apply if you think you're bad at a hero. You shouldn't pick it in situations where you can't execute it and you shouldn't play it. And I do think, and statistically looking at people have done analysis on like Hero League win rates and how much they go up when heroes get past a certain level. Like this is an objectively true thing. Comfort is always better than meta.
Huh?
It's not like an opinion. That is actually statistically verified by multiple people doing multiple levels of analysis on HotS win rates based on hero level. It's a little funky now because replays cap the level at level 20. So recent data on it is like really strange because we don't know if you're level 150 or just level 20. But yeah, comfort always beats meta as long as you have enough tools, as long as the tools make sense. If you have no tools but everyone's on a comfort hero, it's still bad.
Oh, all right. I mean, I guess it makes sense on a certain level that, you know, at the end of the day, you press your buttons, and if you're in a comfort pick, your ability to press the buttons at the right time will be significantly better as opposed to just picking a meta hero because it's meta.
And you can do other things like comms are a really big deal in competitive. Like outside of drafting, comms are a really big deal. If you don't have to think about your buttons because you're so comfortable playing the hero and you can focus on having good comms or having good map awareness or like synergizing with your team, like let's say you're really good at Hanzo, you're a god Hanzo, you can play Hanzo in your sleep. And that means you can always be in perfect position to get those big arrows for like arrow APOC combos. And you're the initiator with the arrow APOC combo, so it's really important that you're very aware of where everyone is on the enemy team. Are they clumped? Are they going through a choke? And if you don't have to think about, constantly bouncing your W's because you can just do it in your sleep, and you can always call, I'm arrowing here, go, 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 go. That's a big deal. Heroes is a very fast game in a lot of ways, like split-second decisions, half-second decisions can matter. So being on a comfort hero where your reactions are faster because you're comfortable will make you better at that hero.
So what you're saying is, when you're playing a comfort hero, basically you are freeing your brain to do other things instead of focusing on clicking the buttons.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, fantastic. So we have a question here from Rob. How do you prepare for a draft? How much is prepared picks versus picking to counter what the opponent picks? We kind of talked about this. When do you ask the questions in draft and when do you answer them? But
it's important to sort of understand what a hero does. So, going back to the Curse Hollow example, if the enemy team has Hanzo, you need vision of boss. How do you get vision of boss? Medivh, Abathur. But there's lots of vision tools. You could even have a Junkrat. Like, you can leave a Junkrat W on boss forever, and it just gives vision. And there's nothing they can do about it. They can't, walk over it like they can with mines. Unless you detonate it, it's just there. That means Junkrat doesn't have his W. That kind of sucks. And if you get into a fight and you use W, you have to go put it back. But there's a lot of vision tools in the game. There's a lot of things that are more or less the same thing. It's just a matter of how optimal it is. It's easy to do Abathur mines. It's hard to do the Junkrat thing because the Junkrat has to change its playstyle. But if you guys have someone who has 400 games of Junkrat, so you always want to make sure you have the tools, but you want to evaluate those tools from your comfort, not from meta.
Okay, I guess it brings us back again to the spreadsheet where you have all those roll sticks and what the heroes can do. And when you have the spreadsheet and you know exactly what your team's capable of, it makes things a lot easier in terms of answering the questions that your opponent is given while still being able to pick what is good for your team, what comfort picks and stuff. I guess.
And we can actually do an exercise to demonstrate this that I think would be pretty interesting.
Okay.
So I'm gonna message you something. So we're gonna do a mock draft here. Where I messaged Heartless a hero pool, and his hero pool is the top 3 heroes in each role from the Western Clash, based on popularity. And we're gonna do a draft on Volskaya, and my hero pool is the top win rate heroes per role in silver and gold. I looked this up earlier. You guys, this is going to be amazing.
Wait. Actually, I have a drafting tool. Do you have one?
I was just going to use Team Picker. But is there an actual up-to-date drafting tool?
Actually, yeah. And the creator of it has actually asked me specifically to announce it today. Okay, I'm going to send it to he asked me to announce it today because we're going to be using it for the mock draft tournament. So I gave you the link.
This is very exciting.
Yeah. Not quite sure how to use it yet. This is the first time I'm seeing it. Actually, I should link it on a stream somehow. Let me see if this is possible. Let's transition. This is just a random map, guys. What you're seeing on the screen.
All right, so we have a viewer link. That's your link.
Oh, we have a link. Okay.
And this is my link.
Wait, do we have a link for everyone to view? For the viewers?
Yeah, there is a viewer link.
Oh, okay.
That's the second one in Discord is the viewer link.
Copy link. Okay, hold on a second. Let me see if I can get it on stream. Alright. Something is loading. Oh, it's big. It's big. Let me see.
Oh no, it's timed. It's timed.
No. Okay, let me just shrink it a bit.
We might have to start over.
Yeah, that's fine. I hope viewers can see it quite nicely. Okay, so we are starting. I guess, or do we start again?
I mean, your timer's ticking down. You have 10 seconds to ban.
Oh my god, what map is that?
Volskaya.
Volskaya. Oh my god, I'm kind of.
A true never accepts defeat.
My work here is done.
Okay, so you ban Garrosh and I ban Genji.
Okay, sorry, but I'm kind of apologize. I'm kind of rushing it because I lost a lot of time. So you've been Genji. Okay. Kane. Let's see my Ben Deckard Kane. I couldn't find him.
Okay, so you ban Deckard, not a noob.
Yes,
I ban
yeah.
Zeratul.
Okay, Ben Zeratul. Now my first pick goes. Okay. Interesting. Did I pick? Yeah.
So you pick Diablo.
Yeah.
Yitar shows me the path to
So I
victory.
picked Kerosene and Sergeant Hammer.
I got this.
Hammer. Okay. I can only pick from the.
Yeah, you can only pick from your hero pool. It's interesting, right? Those are like the most meta heroes in the game right now.
Okay. So I'm gonna go with. Oh my god, it's bugging out. Sorry. I wanted to press Yarel and mouth, but sorry,
that-
but it seems like when I click one time, it doesn't pick. So I'm like, I need
The
to double click. Yeah, the
The
Zul'jin.
Zul'jin is a mouth.
No, the Zul'jin is the Yarel.
Oh, okay.
So mouth Yarel. Oh, I need to fix it. Maybe I need to be faster only.
Okay, I'm banning Ning.
Okay. You banned.
Apparently I banned Zul, but I meant to ban Ming.
Okay.
I want to be able to turn this timer off.
Yeah.
Can we get that as a feature where the timer is optional?
Alright. I'm gonna ban Jaina. I think I need to double click it. Like,
These guys don't even know what
oh, double Gaslow. Okay.
Apparently I picked Gazlo twice somehow. That shouldn't be possible. Again, this is a new site. We're not used to
Yeah.
using it yet. So that's Gazlo and Probius.
Okay, so those are now my double picks coming in here. So it's gonna be Raynor and Genji for me, which I can.
Genji's banned.
Oh, then Mayev for me. Raynor. Well, or Lilian Diva, whatever.
All right, that was terrible. Let me see if we can get this up. So you picked Diablo,
If our enemies demand war, then they
Yrel.
should have it.
Mm-hmm. Mouth,
Mal,
Raynor.
that's Cassia, Raynor,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mayev.
Mayev. Interesting call. And I picked Gazlo, Sergeant Hammer. Again, I want to emphasize this is the highest win rate hero is a gold and silver hero league. And then my support.
I have to admit though, you did catch me by surprise with this draft. I was completely not prepared for this. On top of this new drafting tool, so.
Oh, my support was Kerosene. Yeah, the drafting tool was more of a problem. If we hadn't had a timer, I think we would have been
Yeah.
like 100% fine.
Yeah. I think
And
the only thing I'd change here perhaps would be the Moth over Stukov, but whatever.
And Varian. So I'm gonna link this in chat, and I'll link it to you. If you want to put a picture of the draft up on stream without the bans.
You were banned. Wow, were you timed
Oh,
out?
unlucky.
Wait, allow. How do I allow? Does allow work? I don't know. Or permit maybe.
I am banned for 15 more seconds.
Cav,
Still
you were
banned.
not.
Anyway, I think you see you on Discord.
Okay. All right.
So if you wanna potentially put it up on stream.
I will.
Oh, a mod got us. A mod got us. Shout out to Astreus.
Okay. Fantastic. Yes, I will link this on screen.
So this is literally what some pro teams will do, is they'll go look at what people are drafting, and they'll just draft it. Now, his comp is not bad. Like, no one would look at this and be like, we're so disappointed we got Urel, Diablo, Malfurion, Raynor, Maev. Right? But let's say you are a Division 4 lounge team, and your average MMR is silver and gold, and these are the heroes that you see success with in Hero League literally every day on the right-hand side. You see the Varian, you see the Kerosene, you see the Proteus, you see the Gazelle, you see the Hammer. This is Volskaya, where zone control is incredibly important, and you have like 3 incredibly scary zone control heroes. And if anyone comes in, they immediately get focused by the taunt. This is actually a reasonable composition, and it's easier to execute in terms of mechanics, in terms of all those heroes. All those heroes are fairly easy mechanically. Hammer, is maybe the most difficult in terms of timing the level 4 talent. Gazlo is difficult in terms of managing mana. But like Varian and Kerosene is very difficult in terms of positioning, because you can be overly aggressive with Kerosene and die. Otherwise known as feeding.
I mean, Naznari is bringing a good point though, man. Thinking it's gonna be taunt in Silver League.
It statistically it usually is.
Okay.
So it's not until you get to like platinum that people start going Twin Blades all the time, even when you need a tank. Although it doesn't happen in lower leagues. It just does happen sometimes. But like Raynor's a simple hero mechanically. Malf very hard mechanically. Constantly managing your Qs, managing your mana, stepping up, Wing, and then backing up for safety. Urel, very hard to play. Her win rate early on, even though she was really strong, even before she got buffed, was low because she's just hard. She's so awkward in a lot of ways to play. Diablo, hitting your wallstones consistently, very difficult mechanically. If this were 2 pro teams, and I was looking at this draft, I'd be like, blue wins. If this were 2 gold or silver teams, and I'm like, mechanical execution is going to be inconsistent, I would bet on red 100% of the time. And like this is just literally Western Clash Pro Meta versus Silver and Gold Hero League. And so understanding the level you're executing at in draft actually makes a really big difference. Mm-hmm. And Heartless drafted that with like 5 seconds warning. We didn't talk about it before the show. I was like, this is your hero pool. Just go. And that's actually how easy drafting goes. Once you understand roles, once you understand what your hero pools are for your team, drafting just gets incredibly simple, because you're just like, I know I need to fill this role, so I'm picking this. This is probably going to be a contested meta pick, so I need to pick it early rather than later, because I know I want it for my comp. So drafting can be incredibly difficult and intricate, especially when you're talking about the wide variety of every comp that's potentially viable in Heroes of the Storm. The all assassin comp that Tempo Storm ran, or the all frontline assassin comp, where Mathael was the tank, and they were essentially had vision control because they had better wave clear, because not everything goes to wave clear. The Soul Tank Uther that Octalysis ran, like all of those comps potentially viable, but not standard. And when you're playing standard, you're playing with fixed hero pools, drafting is actually pretty easy, and then you can start to be more intricate with off meta picks or picks that people on your team specialize in. Really good example, Valeera dumpsters Genji. There's no world in which a good Valeera player loses to a good Genji player, because you just wait for the Genji to come in. He's going to have to come in eventually, or he's useless, and then you just silence him and he dies. You can actually just 100-0 a Genji in the duration of your silence with the correct Valeera build if you can hit your Qs.
I started playing Valeera, and let me tell you something. I'm not a good Valeera, but I can dumbstun Genjis, and I'm not a good Valeera, so you don't even need to be a good Valeera.
If you have a guy in your team who plays Valeera, you don't need to worry about Genji. So you not only want to think about, okay, these are our hero pools, this is what we like, this is what we're good at, but you can start to think about, this is what we're good at, this is the heroes they're good against. We don't care if those heroes are in the game. That's a big thing. We can execute against those heroes. We just don't care if they exist. So there's a lot of things to think about with drafting. It's not just there's not like an absolute rule, this is this is this. There's always a lot of room for outplay, and especially the lower the level the drafting you're talking about is, the more room for outplay exists at the pro level. Like if I watch a pro replay from a top team and there's a particular offlane matchup, I know who's going to win it. I don't even need to watch the replay to know who's going to win, unless egregious mistakes are made. I just know who's going to win. But at lower levels of play, there's always outplay potential. There's always stuff you can do, and you're more likely to know what the outplay is on a comfort hero.
True. So we have another questions here coming from Unlucky, which I believe is Alexa Boy. How and when to draft heroes that single-handedly warp the way the map is played? Examples: Hanzo, Abba, Viking, Samura, etc. And how to draft against them. He has some more questions, but I guess we can break it down.
I mean, all the time if you can execute them. Like ADRD is literally all he does is he drafts comps that like we have to respond to this or it sucks. Like he plays the Abathur, he plays the these weird comps, and people hate playing against ADRD in the professional scene because they're forced to respond to his drafts, and they execute because they always practice those exact comps. So if you can force your enemy to either respond to you or lose, if you have some strategy or hero pool on a particular map, do that. Just do that 100% of the time until people adjust to it. People always call it cheese at first, but the thing about cheese is either it's good and it's either bad and it only works once, or a few times until people think about it and figure out how to shut it down, either through bans or whatever. But even if they shut it down through bans, that's like a huge advantage because then they're not banning other heroes that you can play. Or it lives long enough to become the meta. Like if a strategy exists and it's good, it just becomes meta.
Okay. The follow-up question is: how much should an amateur team change their game plan during a draft to adapt to something like that, considering they have limited practice and hero pool?
Oh, say that again? That's a good question. I want to make sure I got it right.
How much should an amateur team change their game plan during a draft to adapt to something like that, considering they have limited practice and hero pool?
That's a good question. And a lot of it just comes down to execution. You may not want to change your draft at all if it's something you can sell. Like, good example is Vikings. Like, Vikings on towers has a really one-dimensional play style. It's soak the other two lanes, get sapper camps and cooldown, 4-man push bottom, and just win bottom as hard as possible so you have the dominant lane. That's why Vikings is good on towers. Because towers is something we went over last week. Towers is a very macro and map. You can out macro Vikings by pushing. If you lose bottom but get top and mid somehow, which I mean, like with certain heroes, Zagara, Asmodan, not unrealistic to have that happen. That's 4-2. You get the top altars, they get the bottom altars, but you can take back bottom if they leave faster, and you can even like clear the wave so that you can proxy clear, and they're forced to like always deal with the wave pushing in. So you don't necessarily have to change your draft at all. It's just you want to have tools to answer. If they have a 4-man team fight comp, and Vikings, you want to be able to hunt down the Vikings, deny soak. Maybe you have a global so you can force 5v4s consistently all game. Yeah, even if it's a good 4-man team fight comp, a 5v4 is hard to win. So again, know what tools you have, know what tools each hero has that you're potentially going up against, even if you're never going to play it, and think about how to answer the questions that the enemy team is asking. But there's always more than one answer. Prioritize the heroes that have answers that you can actually play.
I guess it also brings another question, like how important is scouting? And if they are trying to execute, if you know that your opponent is trying to execute some weird comp, or not necessarily know beforehand, but you can see that as the draft unfolds, you see that them picking a very strong hero like Vikings, Abathur, but you also know from your scouting that they don't actually play this hero, then perhaps no change is needed because they don't really have any practice on the hero. They're just trying to copy some meta pick, so maybe an overreaction is not needed. So
it's true. And I think particularly in Heroes Lounge, like a lot of the games get updated on the website, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All the official matches. So scouting is easy. in Heroes Lounge. Scouting an open division is pretty easy if it's a top team because their games go up on Master League. You can even watch the replays and see how they do certain rotations and like maybe look for things you can punish. Why are they drafting the style composition or the other things they could pick instead? Scouting is important when planning your drafts. And that goes back into how many hours into the week do you want to invest in a draft prep. Pros average 8. You don't have to do that many, but it might be a good idea to invest like some time.
All right. Next question from Staubfinger. Adapting question for the mock drafts. On maps like Braxis or Dragonshire, where it is important not to lose the solo lane and the 4-man, how do you approach the solo lane pick if you have to pick it earlier than the enemies? The decision which 4-man is winning can change with one pick and isn't as easy to telegraph in draft as a rock, paper, scissors top lane. So
that's a good question.
Actually, I'm going to link it to you as a whole. So
that's a good question. And really what it comes down to in drafting, and there's actually a specific general rule for drafting the offlane specifically from first or second pick. If you're first pick, the enemy team can always hold their offlane until literally last pick. They can always guarantee that they have a favorable matchup in terms of wave clear and in terms of point contesting, because there's more than like one hero that wins. So if you pick your offlane in the 1-2-3, they can pick it in the 4-5 and leave their fifth pick for flex. If you pick it in the 4-5, they can leave it literally for last pick. So outside of Urel, who is dumb and dominates pretty much every lane, the worst you can do against Urel is tie. Like or the best you can do against Urel is tie. Like that's the best you can do. You can't actually win a lane against Urel. So ridiculous. Outside of that, like Outlier, which should be banned in almost all cases on Dragonshire, it actually is a big deal. It's one of the major advantages the second pick has. First pick, so from first pick on Dragonshire, you're trying to win the 4-man. You want to get 3 power picks early on. Just like, boom, this is our 4-man. It is a better 4-man. We got more power picks in it. Because and from second pick, you really want to make sure you're always winning the offlane, so that there's a point on the map where you're safe, and you always know who you're going up against in the offlane. Chinese teams, Super Perfect Team, used to abuse this. They would first pick Zagara, and everyone's like, "Oh, that's obviously an offlane Zagara. We'll just pick like a counter to Zagara." And you would immediately pick the counter to Zagara because you couldn't risk them banning the counter, right? You couldn't risk them banning a hero that's good into Zag because you need to pick right away. And they would pick a counter to the counter, and they would put Zag in the 4-man.
Debated.
It's very frustrating to deal with. Yeah, it's actually like a big deal. So it can be you can like bait people, you can trap people into having unfavorable matchups, but in general, rule of thumb: second pick on a map where the offlane really matters, unless you're getting Urel for some godforsaken reason. Last pick, or pick your offlaner in the rotational slot after they pick their offlaner, so that you know you're winning if you're second pick, and pick power picks for your 4-man because you know you should get countered in the offlane from first pick.
Interesting. Good. Next question from Dantro. Proactive versus reactive drafting. When do you think a team should focus on the different approaches? Proactive, we know. Okay, he just described it. Okay, so when do you go for proactive and when do you go for reactive? I guess we touched all of those stuff with
first and second pick.
Yeah.
You should draft proactively from first pick and reactively from second pick in an ideal world.
Fantastic. Another question, Cascon asking, is it ever a good idea to force a draft? For example, picking something that might not be the best in the situation to learn its matchup and what can counter your draft, etc.
In scrims, yeah. Like if you're scrimming and you're like, I don't know what's good here. I have a really good example of this. There's a Diva comp that I like to run on Shrines. Ever since I saw JPL play main tank Diva on Shrines, I'm like, I'm doing that. And I've run a lot of main tank Diva games on Shrines, a lot of different compositions. You know what Dumpster's main tank Diva on Shrines? Stukov. Shove can deal with bomb by just like, pooh, bomb's gone. Booster in, silenced. Can't hit my E. I'm dead now because the mech dies and then I'm in a silence pool as Diva anyway. I didn't know that the first time I drafted the comp. I had to play to a Stukov, and I'm like, I'm always going to ban Stukov if I do this. 100% of the time. And so it can be good in scrims to force a comp and be like, what's good against this? You can get false positives. Sometimes in pro play, you'll actually see people be like, why are they banning that? And I think Wubby actually gave an interview about an ETC ban that Freedom did. And they were like, what? We wouldn't have picked ETC here anyway. But it was banned out. And it's like, you can get false positives from scrim. So you really need to go back in the replay and be like, is this actually a problem, or were we just bad? Or were they just gods? Like, is this going to be a problem against normal players and not this one trick that's god at this hero? So don't just be like good or bad. Go back and analyze the replay, make sure it's actually bad. See if there's adjustments you could have made. See if there's outplay potential that you weren't utilizing. For instance, this is Bunker should counter Warden's Cage 100% of the time. The caveat to that is you have to say Bunker for Cage. So you can't do things like on Blaze that are aggressive where normally you would use Bunker to self-save. You have to say Bunker for Cage. And you have to place Bunker as a bridge so that you can get into Bunker on one side of the cage and get out on the other side of the cage and never actually touch the cage. Pro players mess this up semi-frequently. But Blaze should just counter my F. It's just a question of were you executing it. Or Blaze should counter Cage. Blaze doesn't necessarily counter my F because Containment Disc is really annoying. Yeah.
Fantastic. Another question from Dentro. Is it a good idea, is it a good or bad idea to run the same draft on every map and only change when bands picks force you?
So the 2016 Summer World Championships, Tempest upset the world and took the World Championship title away from MB Black. And they did it with 3 heroes per player. Same drafts, every map. There are metas where that's viable, and Greymane was meta at the time. Greymane's good at camps. Greymane was good at wave clear. Greymane was good at hero damage. Greymane had a high generalist sort of applicability. Brightwing was good at the time. Globals are always good at macro, so you always have that advantage. Tassadar was meta at the time. Again, wave clear hero. Engage tanks were meta at the time. They had Muradin. So if you have a large suite of generalist heroes in your hero pools, you can actually run the same comp on every map. It is possible, and teams have done it. HHE this last phase, HQ had the smallest tank pool of any player in the world officially for HEC. And they just played a lot of heroes that were very, very generalist. They could do multiple things. You're never going to surprise people with map-specific strats if you follow that playstyle, but your execution will be consistent. So if your execution is consistent, you can win a lot of games.
Makes sense.
It's just, do you want to play a lot of different heroes, or do you want to play a small number of heroes very, very well? And if you're trying to be competitive, you need to be able to do both. You need to play a large number of heroes very, very well. But if you're trying to be have fun but win, then it's obviously easier and more efficient to practice a small number of heroes and try to play them very well. But if you're just trying to fuck around and outdraft the enemy team, even if you're not going to be able to execute your comp perfectly, then draft whatever. It's fine.
So I guess it comes down to whether you want to win or not, in a sense, or have fun, win or have fun. And there's a follow-up question from the intern chat. Who do you call a generalist? Who is a generalist hero nowadays?
Generalist tanks, I would say, are Diablo, Muradin, Garrosh, Johanna. I think those are the most generalist tanks right now. They each offer specific tools. They all have some kind of synergy with other heroes that they can do specific things with. They all have a lot of tools. They have personal survivability. Generalist supports that aren't easily countered, I would say Deckard, Stukov, Malf, if you can pick him late. Rhaegar's always going to be a good general support because he has every tool. Rhaegar has cleanse, he has ancestral. Rhaegar has 80% of everything but he's not 100% in any category, except for the fact that he has cleanse. So like Rhaegar is always going to be one of the best journalist supports.
Mm-hmm.
You can put Kharazim up there, but Kharazim's late game power spike can make him a little bit of a liability. No specialists. If you want to draft the same comp on every map, just take all the specialists and chuck them out the window, because they're generally better or worse on some maps. Sergeant Hammer is the only real exception to that, because she's basically just an assassin.
Yeah.
Whatever Blizzard, like most specialists are just assassins. I might put Murky in there. Murky as an off lane is generally viable, but then you have to have a Murky player, and no one actually wants to be on a team with a Murky player. So, there's that. For assassins,
Abathur, maybe from the specialists.
No, because
No.
I would say solo support Abathur is generally viable, but Abathur in the flex spot requires specific style of drafting.
Okay.
So, yeah. For assassins, Jaina, Gul'dan, Kael'thas, Falstad, Phoenix. You'll notice there's a trend here. All of these heroes at some point have wave clear, and then another thing. Jaina has wombo combo potential. Kael'thas has a stun. Hanzo has boss control or wave clear. He has to pick, but it's one or the other. Falstad has a global and wave clear at 7. Like generalist DPS all have wave clear.
Okay. Greymane, does it still fit?
Yeah, Greymane has wave clear. Greymane's wave clear is not bad. You cocktail a wave and then Q it or E it and then Q it, and the wave is almost clear. Like a few auto attacks.
Okay. Fantastic.
And then offlaners, Yrel, Blaze, Dahaka. You could add anything in there you wanted. Like you have a Murky player. You have an Artanis player. Maybe Artanis seems pretty good after the changes.
Nice. Another question from Dastan. Would you guys explain, please, which compositions are easier to draft and play, and which are harder, describing them in ascending order from easy to hard? This is actually something we haven't quite touched yet, because there are different compositions, and I guess it's a bit of a bigger topic, but it is something interesting.
I actually have a good answer to this.
Mm-hmm.
And again, examples from pro play. There was an upset at last year's Western Clash where a Zeratul comp that was getting destroyed on Infernal Shrines ended up beating a top EU pro team, who then got so rattled they almost straight up threw game 2 on Crystallis. It ended up in 2-1. And it was another Zeratul, and then third game they banned Zeratul, and it was fine. But wombo combo comps, teamfight comps, are actually the easiest thing to run, because you can practice a really one-dimensional thing. It's like, okay, VP they clumped, we VP'd them, and then we hit RR buttons and we won the fight. Great. Macro comps, split push comps are the hardest thing to run, bar none. So if you're running like Samuro, Abba on Sky Temple, that's hard, because it requires map awareness, it requires constant rotations, it requires knowing when you can push, it requires timing merc camps very specifically. Even Fnatic's fast food comp with Chen, where it was just a push comp with Chen, they literally almost lost a game because they messed up a 10-second window that they had practiced a lot, and they messed it up once, like in an actual game, and they like almost lost the game as a result. Push comps are very timing dependent. They're very hard. Teamfight comps are you hit your wombo, you won the fight, and generally wombos are level 10, so you just like AFK until 10, hit your wombo a few times throughout the game, and you're gonna win. So wombos are easy, macros are hard. Everything else falls on a spectrum in between.
Okay, nice. To the point. Another question from Ziltoid. What is the best way to practice a new hero for your team? Should you just quick match in your off time, try to draft it as often possible in unranked draft or hero league, or is practice with your team the only real beneficial way to learn it? Bit off topic, but that's fine.
Without a real draft, you can't correctly practice positioning. So you can go to QM and be like, okay, I get my buttons. I understand that this button does this and this button does this. That's something you can almost do in try mode. You don't actually have to like do QM with it. But like you can't practice Kel'Thuzad without a tank because you need someone to step up and give you vision so that you can E people and get your stacks. You actually fundamentally cannot practice Kel'Thuzad correctly without a tank, which means you need to be in draft mode or in quick match with a 5 stack that's like helping you practice. So figure out what needs to happen, like what things a hero needs, and like whether that's unranked draft, whether that's Qum with a 5 stack, or even like a 3 stack. Like if you're playing Kel'Thuzad and you have a support and a tank, you're in good shape. You can go practice. Like that's all you need. You won't necessarily have an offlane, but since you're just practicing the mechanics, and like that's enough because you have the vision tool and you have the save tool, which is fragile heroes like Kel'Thuzad need. So there's figure out the minimum you would actually need to practice correct positioning, correct ability usage, and try to get those things in a game. Drafting a hero can be inconsistent, but sometimes it's good enough, and sometimes you actually get to play the hero that you want to play in a comp that's reasonable for it. Get 9 other people together and host customs and hijack the draft so you get your hero, and you get it on a map that you actually want to practice the hero. Maybe. That's what I used to do. I think I checked this the other day. I have 6,700 some odd games played on my main account in Heroes of the Storm. Back in 2015, I actually found a group of people who were tired of Hero League because it was just awful without comms and without real drafts with bans. And so they started playing customs against each other. And I stumbled in this group, and I played over 3,000 games of customs in actual like comps and actual bans and drafts, and like that's sort of how I got started thinking about the game at a higher level. And that's when I started watching a lot of pro play, trying to figure out, okay, why are pros doing these things? So it's a really good way to actually have real games, essentially.
Nice. So basically, get to know the basics of the hero in quick match is fine, but anything more advanced, probably better to go to custom games if possible.
Custom games, unranked draft, Hero League, 5 stacks.
Yeah, 5 stacks. That'd be.
But there's even like map specific things. Like there's cheesable wells on some maps with Samuro or Genji, and you can't figure that out and practice it unless you're actually on that map.
Interesting. So another question, and the last one I believe, from Holmian. Apart from whiteboarding and scrim drafting, is it worth to play unranked Team League to practice drafting? Unranked / Team League to practice drafting. In other words, how do you min-max to get better at drafting?
I mean, scrims are the only good way to practice, honestly. The problem with Team League is the variance in the skill level. We talked about a lot today how much execution matters. In Team League, you can literally go up against people that are Grandmaster and you're Bronze, and no amount of what you draft is going to matter. Also, Team League is dominated by Cho'Gall, for those of you who are not aware. And it's dominated by people who are fake boosting, where they have a Bronze 5 player on their team to shorten queues, and that guy's actually a Master player on a Smurf. So Team League is not competitively viable in that sense. It's not balanced. Unranked is closer to being balanced. Unranked, depending on your region. Like unranked in NA is pretty good. Unranked in EU, to my understanding, from people telling me, it's pretty good. I don't actually play in EU. So I would say unranked is decent. Team League is bad. Scrims are the best thing. And you can practice mock drafts in the Heroes Lounge channel. There's a channel.
Yeah.
You can just go draft against people all the time, day or night. There's a channel in Nexus Schoolhouse Discord, my Discord. There's ways to practice just drafting without having to actually like play the comp. That can be rough for some people. That like, I don't know if I want or not. You can ask someone else, but you can practice drafting outside of actually playing.
Yeah, there's normally like a bunch of people there that are just watching the draft, and then you can just ask for feedback. It's a very common thing to happen there, so don't worry about that. And before we close, kind of want to plug it again, guys. Next week we're gonna be moving the show to Thursday, so it's not gonna happen on Monday. It's gonna happen on Thursday, the 23rd. It's also gonna move an hour, so we're gonna have it happen at 7 p.m. and we're gonna have the mock draft tournament happening next week. If you want to participate, simply direct message any mod in our Discord channel. They will add your entry, and I don't know, maybe you'll have a chance at winning some skin codes. We do have some giveaway to give to the winners, so participate. You will be judged, and it'll be a lot of fun. For the time being, it's gonna be me and Cav as the judges, but I am working on getting a small panel of judges, so it's not gonna be only the two of us, and as well as the Twitch viewers. So the viewers at home, you'll be able to cast your vote too. Don't worry about that. Cav,
Awesome.
thank you so much for joining me. It has been a pleasure as always. Any final words to our viewers?
No, I hope you guys enjoyed this. Drafting can vary a lot between like super abstract when you think about every hero and like really specific when you get down to one team and you're like, these are your heroes. Great. Okay, this is the maps. These are the comps you should run. But there's not that many things to think about if you're only thinking about your level of play. And a lot of the classic mistakes for drafting are actually really obvious once you start mock drafting against people. It's really easy to figure it out. Hopefully you guys learned something. Drafting is just hard in Heroes of the Storm when you're thinking about all the maps and all the heroes and everything that could potentially work. But if you start with the basics and then branch out from there, you'll find you'll have a really good foundation. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the stream, and we managed to make it a little bit clearer in the murky waters of what is drafting and why does it happen.
Indeed. And also check out this man's social medias. There are links right now on in the Twitch chat, so twitch.tv/CavalierGuest if you want to find some more educational content. This fine man here is producing them weekly, so make sure you tune in and check it out. Also follow him on Twitter. Guys and girls, thank you so much for joining in. For those of you who play WoW, good luck with tonight's launch of the new expansion. I know I will be playing, and I'll be also streaming some of it. Thank you for tuning in, and make sure you participate in the mock draft tournament next week. It'll be a lot of fun, I promise. We will not judge you harshly. Or maybe we will, I don't know.
I will judge you harshly.
He will judge you harshly, okay. See you guys next time, and have a good night.